Okay, so the topic for today is Christian architecture. We basically call it early Christian architecture. In the last class, we discussed about the basic planning of a church, and today we'll go for a detailed actual plan of a church which exists today. We discussed about a plan in the last class which had the concept of this plus sign, and we don't call it plus, we actually call this as a cruciform shape. Why do we call it a cruciform? Because this is the shape on which Jesus Christ was cruciformed, and after 3 days he came back after he was crucified. So that was why the early Christian architecture, and that was the time where early Christian architecture actually spread out at its most, because it was kind of a miracle which everyone witnessed. So after seeing this miracle, everyone was too emphasized by this concept, and they thought that yes, there's a power like what Jesus had, so they started following him in his practices. So that was why Christian architecture came into being, and it was at its boom in early Christian architecture. So today in detail we'll discuss the plan of a church, and we'll discuss all the terminologies that we have and what all definitions we have, and how is a different space specified or dignified, and how it is explained in a church. So starting on with the actual plan of a church,
Yes, ma'am.
what were those?
Ma'am, colonnade, pillars, transept, asile, apse, nave,
Wait, colonnades, pillars.
pillars,
This is
asile.
not aisle, it is called aisle.
Okay, ma'am. I
Then
apse,
apse,
nave,
nave,
transept,
transept.
transept. Okay, ma'am.
Hmm. Is that it?
Yes, ma'am. It's central aisle.
Nave is called central aisle.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, I'll give you a quick recap, and the plan that we are going to discuss, it is almost the same, but it has quite few modifications. So this is a typical plan that you need to study, and you'll have to draft the same in your exam. These crosses that I'm making, these are the representation of walls that we have in the roof. If we have to show a if I have to show an arch in my plan, suppose this is a wall and this is a wall, and in between I have an arch. So for representing this arch, I will draw a cross like this. Now this is the representation of an arch that we draw in an actual plan. So in the same way, the arch that I'm drawing here, it represents the walls that we have in the plan, in the ceiling. So these circles that I'm putting up, these are your columns. Now we will start from the entry. The entry of a church is from here. They both look similar, that's why they are called twin towers. Now the very first space that you are seeing here, it is called Narthex. The main entry of church, which is your this portion, this is called Narthex. So the second space becomes our twin towers. The next portion is our nave, and nave, like we discussed in the last class, nave is the central portion of your church. Like we say in Christian weddings that a bride walked down an aisle. So this is an aisle, a passageway on which someone can walk, that is leading up to the end portion of your church. This portion is called nave, and nave is also referred as central aisle. The portion that you are seeing around your nave, this whole portion that you're seeing around the nave, this portion is aisle. This is also called as side aisle. In all these three portions that you are seeing, this blue one, and this one, these are called aisles. So the central one is called central aisle or nave. This is the intersection of your two areas, and you can see this, there is an intersection of plus area in this. So this thing is called transept, and this thing is called the cross section of a transept. The plus sign that we are seeing, let me represent this portion that we are seeing, this whole thing all together is called transept. But the central portion on which both the axes are intersecting each other, this is called crossing. This place is called crossing. And the part which is surrounding this area, that one is called transept. So this whole portion all together is called a transept. And how does the word transept derive? Transept जैसे हम transverse axis कहते हैं, the way we talk about transverse axis, uh, when we talk about a graph, something like this. Then coming down to the next area, which is known as apse. So apse is the last portion of your church. This is just a second. This is not apse. This is actually called ambulatory path. Let's come down to apse first. Apse is the last portion of your church in which we have one elevated platform. Now, this is the portion in which you have a certain elevated platform. You keep one idol of Jesus here, and we also have several choirs singing in this area. Several people stand together. They start singing religious songs in this area. So that's the reason. That's one of the reasons why this place is called choir. Religious songs or preachings or ceremonies are held, and people stand here and sing those religious songs. Okay, now coming to this purple portion, this portion is called as ambulatory path. Now, what is an ambulatory path? Ambulatory path is an area in which we take a complete circle around the deity, or we can say around the main idol of the god, which is also called as a deity. So this place is called as ambulatory path. In further evolution of a church, there were few spaces which were added, which were on these ends of your ambulatory path, and it was in shape of a circle again. Not a circle, you can say an arch, something like this and this. And why was this made? These things were called radiating chapels. By radiating, we mean something which is coming out of a thing. जैसे heat is radiated out of fire, or sun rays are radiated. So in the same way, chapels are radiating out of the plan. That's why they are called radiating chapels. In some books, this thing is also referred as shivets. So this means it is also called as a shivet or radiating chapels. Fine, is that clear? So this is a typical plan of your church. Overall, for to give you a recap, I'll explain all the parts again. So very first portion is your narthex. So what is a narthex? Narthex is the main entryway. You can say entry porch or entryway to the church, from which you enter inside a church altogether. This becomes your narthex. Then comes your twin towers. What are twin towers? These two are aesthetical towers which are installed uh, on both the sides of the narthex, and their main purpose is aesthetics itself. They don't have any space beneath beside it. You don't have any rooms in it. There are no rooms. These are just simple towers, and they are used suppose your church is on this level, the tower is on a particular height. This whole space is actually used for light and ventilation. There is no room or any space inside this which can be used for residing or some purpose. This is just the major purpose of this tower is light and ventilation. Then comes your nave. Nave is part of an aisle. These three spaces that we see, the aisle, the nave, and the narthex, all these things are actually aisles, but the central aisle, to give it some importance, it is referred to as nave, in which you have the area to walk around, and even your sittings are arranged. You also have this aisle like this. You have all the sitting arena here, and in the central portion you can walk. So you put up all the sitting areas somewhere here inside your nave. So to give importance to this area, the central aisle is referred to as nave, and the aisles which you can see on the side, these are side aisles. They are basically used for circulation purposes. Suppose you have a ceremony going on, you don't want to disturb anyone, so you can walk around this aisle. But since you can see they have very huge pillars installed in this area, so uh, if you go beside these pillars, you won't be visible and you won't disturb the actual ceremony or any function that is going on inside this area. Sometimes this aisle is also used for sitting purposes. Suppose your sitting area for a wedding ceremony or something, maybe there's a preaching ceremony or there's a baptism ceremony. Suppose the area of this nave is all filled out, then this aisle area can again be used for sitting purposes in that scenario. So overall, the central aisle works as the central passage, a side aisle works as your circulation, can be used as sitting as well. Then coming to your transept, transept is your actual intersectional area which actually forms that cruciform shape. So this thing is called a transept. The central portion in which your transept and the plan of the church intersects, that is called crossing. And above the crossing, we generally have a tower. Suppose the church is something like this, you have twin towers installed here. In the plan, you will have a central tower which carries the maximum height, and this one is installed over your actual crossing. Crossing ke upar this tower was installed, and sometimes it also used to have a bell. That's why it was also called a bell tower some of the churches. Then crossing is done, transept is done, coming to the choir. We'll go according to the plan. So choir, what is a choir? Choir is a place on which a group of people stand and sing the choir. What is a choir? Choir is a group of people, or you might have seen in movies where people in white dresses, they stand in a group and they sing certain religious songs. So this is again one elevated platform where you have many beautiful things installed. You have a table, you have flowers, you have idols of Jesus and Mary. Everything is installed in this area, and people can stand and do their ceremonies or any ritual things. Then after that comes your apse. Apse is again the basic area, the main area in which the idol of Jesus is installed, and it is the area which is generally elevated from the whole floor level. Next, coming to your ambulatory path. So, ambulatory path in our culture is called pradakshina. In Hindu temples and in most of the Shiva and most of the Vishnu temples in India, we have this pradakshina path in which we take a complete circle around our idol, and then we uh, uh, bow down to the idol and bend and pray the idol of a god. So in the same way, these people have an ambulatory path in which they can move around this whole area, and whole a whole passageway is formed, and this passageway is called, or this process is called, circumambulation. You can search it online, in which we take a complete pradakshina, that is called circumambulation, and then the whole ambulatory path is used for this purpose. Then the last space that we have to study is a radiating chapel. Now, why this was introduced? This was introduced because the people in the clergy, we call it clergy is the group of people who are performing certain religious activities inside a church. This may include a father or a priest or nuns. So everything, all the peoples who are officially and who are religiously related to this part, they are called members of clergy. So since these people increased in number, so they had to had a space dedicated for them. So they started having these spaces where they could sit, they could have their own space. Even sometimes in these radiating chapels, they used to have several books installed related to religion itself, and all the positive motivating books are installed. So this also became kind of a library. So people could sit in the clergy area, which were related to, who were related to the church. Even, okay, there is one more thing. Your transept in the later stages started having one secondary entrance from here. In the later stages, they started having a secondary entrance from the transept. So what happened, this entrance was actually used by priests or fathers who were actually working inside the church. So suppose there is any ceremony or a function happening in the church, so the priest can go inside through this area without disturbing the actual function, and he can just go here. He can go inside the apse area if he has certain activities to perform, without disturbing the actual crowd or the function which is going on. So, this is all about a typical church of Christians. Now, I'll tell you about small variations that these churches have in the later stages. So, the different variations that were introduced in the church, which were coming up in the later stages, the very first was the rectangular hall. What happened was, the earlier churches, they used to have the transept somewhere here, and this was not elongated at all. So the whole form looked something like this. Later on, the rectangular portion below started enlarging. ये नीचे से they started enlarging this whole area in the later stages, and the plan that I discussed with you, that is the actual form formed out of a cruciform, and it looks proportionally balanced. So the rectangular hall had several variations. This rectangular hall had several variations in different eras. So that's why you will see churches having different dimensions of this rectangle, because it evolved with time, it got enlarged with time. So while studying the examples of a church, we'll find certain variation in this rectangular hall. Then the same thing that I discussed earlier, your central nave and aisle. Like I discussed, that you have aisle on the sides and nave in the center, and the aisle is actually adorned by a colonnade. You have columns here. So the variation that you'll find here is, you generally have aisles which are single aisles on the sides. In later on stages in its evolution, what happened, they started evolving this area into double aisle. They started having two corridors at the sides, so they were called double aisle rather than your single aisle. So these are called double aisle because we have two corridors installed. two corridors installed in both the sides of your nave. This is corridor number 1 and the other is the corridor number 2. Then your apse area. So apse is basically on the opposite side of the main door. So this apse also evolved with time. They started introducing some elevated platforms at the end. They also started introducing the Pradakshina path later on, sorry, the ambulatory path later on. So apse area also evolved with time. In starting, it was just a simple semicircle at the end, which used to host every deity and every decoration pieces inside the church. The next modification in the apse was that it was raised later on, and radiating chapels were added around the apse. And I already discussed the function of the radiating chapels. These were meant for the people of clergy. Official or administrative works were done here. Fine. So these were the basic variations that the church had. So now I'll show you some of the pictures of the narthex. Okay. So here you can see your twin towers are around your narthex area. So they are called twin towers since they are similar in nature. This is your main entrance, which is called Narthex. This tower has lots of openings and windows, and even from the above, so that it can take on all the ventilation, all the fresh air, and it could supply that air inside this church. If you can see this tower, this is the tower which is installed over your crossing area, and crossing is the intersection of this transept and this nave area. Now this elevated portion, this is called your transept, and you can see people are are standing here also. We also have an entry from this transept as well. So the primary entry becomes from the narthex and the secondary entry comes out of your transept. So narthex is a porch and it is actually on the western side. I forgot to tell you about this. They used to have entrances from the western side most of the times. So this whole portion in the central area is called narthex. The side twin towers, which are also called facade towers. Facade, what is a facade? Facade is the front elevation of any building. Okay, this is the intersection that you can see, and in most of the churches later on, they started having one tower above this crossing area also. Now, this here you can see one secondary entry which was from your transept. Okay, now in this image, you can see this is the nave, which is also called central aisle. And like I told you, they also have sitting areas inside this nave. You can see all the piers on this side, they were mostly arched ways. And this area that you can see here, these are your side aisles. They are also having sitting area if you want to accommodate more of crowd inside your church. Now just have a look at the roof. This cross is what I was representing in the plan. This cross is actually called a vault. So the same kind of roof is above your nave, and this vaulted roof or ceiling is again above your side aisles area. Now, if you look at this end portion, this is your apse, and here you can see a step up. There is a level up from the actual floor level. So this is what we call an elevated platform, on which you have very most of the furnitures related from culture, religious activities of Christianity. Even you'll find images, sketches, and idols of Jesus towards this side. Okay, so this is your central aisle, these are your side aisles. See, this is how the aisle looks like. So In this example of church, you can see the sitting arrangement is in your nave area, and this aisle is just used for circulation purpose. And you can again see the difference between the height of the ceiling of your nave and your aisle. The height of the ceiling of our aisle is lower as compared to the ceiling of our nave. So this again is a kind of vault. This is called ribbed vault, and these are all your piers. So this is one area. This is the area of your transept. And these windows, you can see these windows are colorful windows. They have several floral or geometrical patterns carved out on this. These windows, which are colored in nature, they are called clear. They are called stained glass windows. This is the last portion. This is the altar. Is the portion uh, which is along with your apse. The place which I mentioned as choir, the space between choir and altar is your, sorry, the space between choir and your apse is your altar. Now, in this altar, you have one elevated platform, then you have a table for performing several rituals and all, and behind this, you have your actual apse. Now, here you can see this is your apse. This is altar, the elevated platform, and the circular portion is your apse. It sometimes have idols, it sometimes have sketches or paintings. These are also referred as frescoes. So yeah, this is how your apse looks like. And now this is the area where you take a complete pradakshina or a circumambulation. This is your ambulatory path, which is installed around your elevated platform, your apse. So let's do a quick revision. What is number one?
Narthex, ma'am.
Narthex, ma'am.
Yes. Number two?
Twin Towers,
Remember Twin Towers.
Yes. Yes. Number three?
Isles,
Number four?
Side
Transept,
aisles.
No, number four is side aisles.
Side aisles.
Side.
Yes, number five.
Transept.
Yes, number six.
Apse.
No, number
Cross.
six is crossing.
Crossing.
This area is
Oh yes,
crossing.
ma'am. Crossing, crossing, ma'am.
Yes, number seven.
Choir.
Yes, this portion is choir. The arrow is marked over the altar. Number nine, ambulatory path. And number 10.
Yes,
Apes,
ma'am.
Number 10 is radiating chapel.
Radiating Chapels.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Number 9 can be ambulatory path, or you can also call it apse. Number 8 is apse, sorry. Number 9 is ambulatory path. Yeah. Okay. So this is evolution of the church, which was done in later stages, but then it was not carried on because this was not that functional. What did in this area was they added one big atrium in front of the narthex, the main, before the main entry. They added one atrium, and it had one complete colonnaded portion. Why this happened? This area was formed so as to make a piazza kind of thing that could cater the whole crowd. Suppose you are having a ceremony or a function inside this area, you will have hundreds of people sitting here. So after the whole ceremony is done, they had to had one space which could cater this whole crowd, and the gather everyone who is gathered here could go out in the open. They could discuss, they could spend time, they could gather in this area. So this atrium was meant just for a leisure purpose, so that these people could go out and have some discussion in open or something like this. So they added this portion, but it felt like it was not functional that much, because if one function is ending, or if we talk about the function of this area, it was very less because people rarely gathered in this area. They would sit and talk inside this particular area itself, and then when everything is over, they would just go to their own places. So this area actually did not seem to solve some purpose or some function. So that's why in later churches, this was one of the additions that they did, but then in the churches coming later on, they didn't follow the same. So this is the same thing. They what they did, one different thing was they added one area called Bhima, because it looked like that this portion was directly over the altar. There was a less gap here. The thing which we call choir is called as Bhima here. This whole place was dedicated for the same, but then again, this place seemed non functional, and this transept was moved again in the lower stage so that we could get this small area here, and the transept could go somewhere here, which could have a separate entry like that. So, this was one of the experimental forms of a church which was done but not followed much. This is the 3D for the same. You can see, you can come here. This is the whole atrium. You go inside. This is this is the actual church, and this is the atrium or the open area where a spillover of all the crowd could be here. This is like a place which is called Piazza in Roman places. What happens in the Piazza is formed outside a theater or a multiplex, so that suppose at 1 o'clock we have a multiplex, and in all the theater, in all the screens, the movie is ending at 1. So we'll have hundreds of person coming out of one small opening. So in later in the, you can say, Romanesque architecture, people started putting up piazzas. So for the purpose was to take on all the spillover crowd inside that area, so that the rush or the crowd is not accumulated inside this zone. But that is kind of functional in the multiplex zone because they don't have a space inside the theater to just gossip and discuss. But inside a church we have ample of space, so this space seemed non-functional. Yeah, this is something that I discussed already. Yeah, that's it.